Upper Echelon is brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning. Turn to Deloitte. Well, in our Upper Echelon this week, Iraj Abedian, who's well known as an economist through an extensive career in that field, but better known nowadays as his role as the founder and chief executive of Pan-African Advisory Services. But let's go back a bit, Iraj, because we often talk to you about Iranian issues. MTN has been in the news a little bit lately. We've had chats about that. You were born there.
Yeah, I was born in Iran. Came to South Africa in 1980 as a student. Went to UCT.
Why?
It's a complex story. Iran had its revolution, and I could see that there was no future in terms of my profession and my professional aspirations. Also, I'm a member of the Baha'i faith. At the time, international Baha'i community was encouraging young people to go and study wherever they can, and in South Africa, and promote racial unity. So that was a good win-win for me.
Wonderful combination.
Yeah.
So South Africa was part of your, I think you've explained it now, rather than perhaps another part of the world?
I think it was more intentional aspiration to come and learn about South Africa, understand how the society operates, and find a way of serving the society.
Do you keep your connections to your roots?
Absolutely. My mother is still there. My brother and sisters are there. I don't go anymore because the situation is just unstable. But they come and visit every 2 years or so, and we keep in touch regularly.
Of course, it's a very deep culture as well.
It's a deep culture. It's over 2,500 years old. So it also creates, because of its age-old culture, creates all kinds of complications, ego, pride, a sense of superiority, etc., etc.
How did you find studying and living in South Africa in the 1980s, given that you came here, as you say, to promote racial harmony?
I spent the first 3 years just understanding, listening, learning, initially in Cape Town, and soon I realized Cape Town was not really Africa. Some would argue still is not Africa. So I went to then Transkei and spent 14, 15 months literally on horseback, going from village to village, sleeping there, understanding the economy, trying to quantify as part of my master's degree what happens in a subsistence economy, how people blend factors of production, what type of productivity do they get. And that helped me a great deal to firstly understand the structural duality of the South African economy, but also came in touch with freedom fighters at that time in the villages, and we had excellent and enlightening discussions.
Have you kept in many of those relationships going?
Many of them, those who passed on, but those who are alive, very much so.
So you finished your degree at UCT and decided to stick with academia?
Yeah, I went to University of Transkei at the time, which is now Walter Sisulu University. Did a junior lectureship job whilst I was doing my master's research in the villages. When I finished, I went back to UCT. They invited me back, and I took up a lectureship there, and then stayed there, worked my way up through the academic ladders, all the way to professorship.
What does it mean, a professorship, for someone like you coming from another country?
It means a great deal. It means that you focus on your academic achievements, understanding, researching different spheres, publishing, trying to publish at a level that is peer-reviewed, accepted, and then go from local to international. I went to Canada for my PhD. That was a very educational and beneficial sabbatical I took to the University of Simon Fraser.
I'm sure they must have asked you a lot of questions here, given your 15 months on horseback around the Transkei.
Yeah, it was really very exciting. I did some lecturing at university there, and also University of Washington in Seattle, where at that time Americans had a very unique and skewed vision of South Africa. And it was a fantastic opportunity as an academic for me to set some records right and engage in debate.
And you've remained in national service in so many ways. Where do you find the time?
It's hard. It's a mission, and I like it, and I find it as a challenge. I like to stay true to what I came here to do. And it's absolutely right. It's very hard to do the business, to run a business, and to also provide some national service to the communities, and also stay in touch with the communities is a challenge.
When you say what you came here to do, so your faith, your moral compass is still very much core to your existence.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, economics is about morality. It's about the underpinning of economics is moral values, as forefathers of modern economics told us as back as 17th and 18th century. The fact that modern global environment has deviated from that and has caused enormous amount of pain socio-politically is really a vindication that we have to go back to basics. And for me, that's a very important radar every day, almost every hour of the day.
It's interesting you raise that, because Adam Smith did make the assumption that there would be a certain standard of morality for all of his theories to work, didn't he?
Absolutely. David Hume began the debate, Marshall and others continued all the way to Adam Smith and post-Adam Smith, even Keynes. Keynes in 1944 said the issue of production is pretty much resolved. We have nothing to explore anymore. But the issue of distribution remains our overarching challenge. And up to then, we haven't resolved it.
How well or badly are we doing in this country in that regard?
We've done very badly. I mean, we've seen the symptoms of it. We are possibly now the most unequal society amongst the economies that matter. And ironically, one of the most resourceful economies and societies. So to have that resourcefulness, and in the face of that, have this incredible disparity, have incredible misery that comes from widespread unemployment, is painful, and it's very ironic.
Now, there are some who say that the labour legislation is at the core of this. You've advised to enough cabinets in this country to perhaps have a different view.
I don't necessarily have a different view, except that labour legislation in the broader tapestry of factors is just one factor. We need to not look for a simple, elegant scapegoat. And therefore, one day, if you're sitting on the capitalist side, you say it's labour legislation. If you're sitting on the union side, it's the executive's pay packages. And that doesn't help. The reality is that a number of complementary pieces of this jigsaw puzzle are out of kilter. Labour legislation, elements of labour legislation, not the entire labour legislation, is one factor. But so is the framework for the value system that drives the public sector. 45 to 50% of our GDP is channeled through public sector. The amount of abuse, corruption, misuse exacts a huge, huge tax on the poor. And the rich and the business sitting there watching it is also morally questionable. So focusing on labour legislation and ignoring the other pieces, to me, is a bit of one-sided judgment, looking for a silver bullet.
So it's complex.
It's complex. Societal development and economic progress is a very complex process. You mustn't reduce it to one or two elements. And when it comes to issues of poverty and factors that contribute to it, it's not just market forces. It's moral values. It's the individual's values. It's the culture of what you want to achieve from your life. Do you want to get or do you want to receive, and on what terms? So all of that intermingled. And much of the political economy debate in South Africa is looking for one single scapegoat. And that's where we spend enormous amount of energy missing each other, crossing each other. The problem pervades and deepens.
And it's not one side or the other that's at fault, it's possibly both.
I think it's all. Business is at fault, labor is at fault, because labor unions pretty much losing credibility with their own members. Government and the state are at fault big time. And they are the ones that are supposed to be the coordinator, the impartial mediator, and the force that focuses the other stakeholders on the real issues of the society. And unfortunately, that's not the case.
Iraj, you've made almost a lifetime of trying to help, of trying to make a contribution, from the RDP to GEAR to Esquisa to the role that you've played at the Development Bank of South Africa. Even I see in your CV, the Department of Justice, you're involved there as well. What keeps you going? What ensures that you don't give up and say, well, this is too big a tsunami to swim against?
Look, we can't give up. For as long as we're alive, we have to try to do something and do it positively. Criticize, yes, but beyond the criticism, you have to roll up the sleeves and say, okay, what can I do? What's the little contribution that can I make in a positive way, without expectations of reward, also without expectations of heroic change overnight. And social progress is a slow, painful, and complicated process. And if each one of us does in their own areas the little bit that they are good at, then we make an impact. So the option to not to do something is to pack up and go. Why do you want to stay somewhere where you're uncomfortable and you're not prepared to make a contribution to make it better? And my option is try to understand the complexities and then get up in the morning and say, okay, what's the little thing that I can do? And do it in the best of intention, come what may.
The starfish factor, I suppose. You throw each starfish that you throw back into the ocean makes a difference to that starfish, even though there might be millions that aren't going to have that opportunity.
I remain as a student of this field. I don't have any false impression that I can make a difference, but I can make a humble contribution and hope that through that I will learn more so that I can make hopefully a bigger contribution.
Yeah, so often we see perhaps those who are putting the spokes in the wheel. They get the publicity. They're the ones who are in the limelight. But there are so many people behind the scenes, good people, who are trying to make an honest contribution. Rampele has recently come out very strongly with her views. But for years, she's been beavering away behind the scenes. Do you think that or what will it take for the good, if you like, or the balance of good in society to overwhelm those who perhaps are a little more narcissistic?
I think it takes humble, service-oriented input all the time. And I have absolutely no doubt that ultimately that force will win. Whatever the short-term publicity or sort of credit that other forces might get, criticism can identify but cannot construct. Forces of negativity can cause debate, can cause concern and fear, but they cannot construct. Construction comes through a very continuous, systematic, and committed input towards good and positive things.
You're right, just getting back to your own career. After Standard Bank, where you served on the executive committee, many would have thought for an economist that was the pinnacle. The group economist serving on the Exco, making decisions on the most valuable bank on the African continent. Why leave?
I immensely enjoyed my time at the Standard Bank, and I must, even now, 10 years later, express my thanks forever to Jacko and the team, and they were fantastic, and I learned a lot. But after a while, it turned out that chief economist at a bank like a Standard Bank is doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's about inflation, it's about interest rate, it's about balance of payments, growth, which is wonderful if you have a mindset that you want to do the same thing over and over again. My aspiration was to learn a lot more. I was looking for learning how to establish businesses, and I've always been entrepreneurial in my life, even before coming to South Africa. So for me, getting into the private equity space was the right way. Listed entities was not for me, and I couldn't add anything more. So I decided to take my checkbook or my pension from Standard Bank and establish Pan-African Capital and start investing in companies and understand the business side of economics, which was very interesting and challenging and ever-changing. So yes, you have to understand your economics, and I stayed, my DNA is economics. But then I moved into private equity, established Pan-African Capital, alongside doing economic research, and that has been enormously challenging but also enormously educational for me.
So it's almost two sides of the coin. You still continue to research, as you said, but get into the nitty-gritty of companies through private equity. Have you had any successes?
Well, thank God, yes, we've managed to survive the crisis, and our net asset value has moved. The company, 7 years later, has got a balance sheet of over 150 million rand from almost nothing. except hard work and input and good partners. So I'm very, very pleased and in a way privileged to have succeeded.
And you keep coming up with interesting ideas, like the platinum exchange. Tell us about that one.
It's one of the powers debate that we have in South Africa about beneficiation, mineral beneficiation. I had the privilege of being part-time advisor to Minister Shabangu for 2 years. That pushed me to go into understanding what mining is in South Africa and how do we understand beneficiation. I was quite clear, and I'm still now, even now, more convinced that this notion of simple beneficiation that is branded around in the political circle is just a smokescreen. So one of the key areas that my research showed was that metal commodity exchanges is a major source of beneficiation for the countries that can engineer it, that they can bring it about. And of course, South Africa being host to 80% plus of known reserves of platinum and similar percentage of chrome and even more, 90% of manganese, it stands to reason from basic economics and business logic that if we can bring about and formulate and establish a commodity exchange in those key areas, we stand to benefit right across the value chain. Let me just also add that this is not what some media has said. This is not a single government-driven marketing agency. I'm talking about a commodity exchange with full capabilities and full associated activities, from stock exchange to derivatives to spot market to future to finance to physical, the whole value chain. A very complex but a real beneficiation with thousands of job opportunities, literally billions of additional GDP revenue.
And who's listening?
Nobody at the moment, except those who are on the cutting edge of thinking how do we create more value. Stock exchange, I've had discussions with the right team at JSE. I've had discussions with politicians, intellectuals, and one or two mining houses. But of course, since the idea was raised, platinum has been thrown into chaos. So I'm hoping that post this Marikana tragedy, we would go back to the baseline and talk about how do we turn the resource base of platinum into a real beneficiation engine. And it's just the beginning, it's not finished.
We shouldn't waste this crisis.
Not at all. I mean, that in itself tells me that it's a good opportunity to go back to rethink some of the basics. We can't afford another 10 years, 15 years of old style mining and talk about beneficiation and see no beneficiation. And we need to also learn from our own history. South African history is a very, very powerful example of how to beneficiate mining, how to use a fairly undiversified, primitive and primary economy in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and turn it by the end of the century into a fairly diversified modern economy. It is interesting, Alec, that if you look at resource comparison of known reserves of South Africa in the late 19th century, today we have more proportionally of known reserves of valuable commodities globally than we had then. If we manage to convert that relatively limited resource base into the economy that South Africa became, I have no doubt that with the right leadership and the right focus, we can use our resource base to do magic in a way and do far more than what we need to overcome our social problems.
So let's stop the hot air and start doing focus on what can be achieved.
Exactly, and interesting enough, what can be achieved given what's happening to Africa, to our neighborhood for the first time, what's happening to the global change of guards in a geopolitical sense. All factors are in our favor. Regrettably, internal forces are not in our favor. Internal leadership in business, in government, in labor is not focused on national interest. There's a lot of claim and counterclaims and very little nitty-gritty, practical, business-oriented initiatives to unlock the capacity that the country has.
So that's it. That's all we need.
I think at this stage that's agent. It's not. It's
a starting point.
Exactly. That's a catalytic starting point to focus the mind. Then we have a mountain of work to do. But the work is just a process.
Iraj, are you confident about the future of this country?
I am very confident. I believe South Africa has had a tortured history that it's been really a succession of crises that has focused the nation's mind, so to speak. And I'm encouraged by the intellectuals that are coming out. You mentioned Dr. Rampele, a whole host of others that have sprung out to say enough is enough. We can't degenerate. We got to regenerate. We got to go back to some of our South African basics. That has been exemplary not only for ourselves but globally. So none of those resources have evaporated. None of those robustness within the society, within the economy have disappeared. They've gone quiet. They've been intimidated to silence, some of them. But we can see that in the moment of crisis they come out. And I'm very optimistic that we will get it back together again.
Iraj Abedian, founder and chief executive of Pan-African Advisory Services. Upper Echelon was brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning. Turn to Deloitte.